Murder charges filed in a bizarre case after this man's body was discovered in a local reservoir. The Douglas County Sheriff's Department arrested Brittany Baker, also Mario Barber. The two were living in a home less than a mile and a half from where that body was found.
There's a kind of person who spends their whole life on the giving end of other people's good nights. The one who remembers your order before you say it. The one whose face means you've arrived somewhere familiar, somewhere safe. We don't think of people like that as fragile. We think of them as fixtures, as permanent as the room they stand in. But what happens when the person whose entire life was built on making strangers feel welcome becomes the one nobody can find, and then the one nobody can even recognize? That's the question that sits at the center of today's story, and the most disturbing part is that the people who loved him still don't have the answer. Neither, it seems, do the rest of us. Welcome to Crime Cipher. We decode the cases the headlines summarize and the truth the system leaves behind. Subscribe if you are new here, because some stories don't just deserve to be watched. They deserve to be remembered, and this is one of them. Douglas County sits just to the west of Atlanta, the kind of place that feels like a deep breath after the noise of the city. Rolling roads, stretches of green, neighborhoods where the lawns are kept and the streets are quiet. Cutting through the southeastern edge of the county, along Georgia Highway 166, there's a body of water called the Dog River Reservoir. It's the sort of place most people only ever see from the road, water and tree line and sky. Nothing that asks for a second glance. On the 15th of May, that ordinary stretch of water stopped being ordinary. A crew of workers was out there assisting with an expansion project at the reservoir, a routine job on a routine day, the kind of work where the biggest concern is supposed to be the heat. But these workers were about to find something that no expansion plan accounts for. In the water, they discovered a man's body. No identification, no clear story, just a human being pulled from a reservoir in a county where this simply isn't supposed to happen. And here's what made it worse. Whoever this man was, the condition of what they found left investigators with almost nothing to go on. They had a body, but they did not have a name. They had a victim, but they did not yet have a single thread to pull. Therefore, the first question wasn't who killed him. The first question, the one that would take an agonizing month to answer, was simply this. Who is he? The man's name, though no one knew it yet, was Jamal Parker. He was 37 years old, and he came from Atlanta. By trade, he was a bartender, and not a quiet one. He was well known across the city, a man who'd poured drinks in bars all over Atlanta, the kind of face regulars looked for when they walked in the door. Think about what that work actually is. A good bartender is a keeper of 1,000 small moments. The first drink after a brutal week, the toast on the best night of someone's year, the familiar nod that tells you you're among people. That was Jamal's world. His father, Charles Parker, would later put it simply. His son, he said, was loved by everyone. But on that day at the reservoir, Jamal Parker had no name. He had been reduced to something investigators could barely work with, and the people searching for answers were left with only one place to start: his skin. Because Jamal carried his identity in it. Tattoos, the markings he'd chosen and worn in life, were now the single thread detectives could pull. So the Douglas County Sheriff's Office did something that tells you just how little they had. They released photographs of his tattoos to the public, hoping that somewhere out there, someone would recognize the artwork and give this man his name back. Sit with the weight of that for a moment. A person who spent his life being recognized, the familiar face behind the bar, was now so unrecognizable that the only way to reach for his identity was through the designs on his body. The man everyone knew had become the man no one could name. That answer wouldn't come quickly. For a full month, investigators worked alongside the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, turning to the one method that can speak when a face no longer can: DNA. And on the 15th of June, exactly 1 month to the day after the body was pulled from the water, the science came back. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation positively identified the man through a DNA comparison. The body in the Dog River Reservoir finally had a name again: Jamal Parker. But naming him didn't bring peace. It only opened the door to a far darker question, because now investigators had to ask how a beloved Atlanta bartender ended up here, and the trail was about to lead somewhere almost no one could have predicted. To understand where the trail led, you have to go back a few weeks to a different investigation entirely, one that on the surface had nothing to do with a body in a reservoir. While Jamal Parker still lay unidentified, deputies in Douglas County were closing in on a house. Not in a rough part of town, not in the kind of place you'd expect. This was a home in the Langdale Chase subdivision. Michigan, a quiet, upscale community in the southern part of the county, the kind of street where neighbors wave and nothing seems out of place. But police had received a tip, and on the 20th of May, they raided that home. The house belonged to a couple, Mario Andre Barber, 46 years old, and Brittany Amber Baker, 42. And what investigators say they found inside that ordinary-looking home was anything but ordinary. This wasn't a stash of cash or a bag of drugs in a drawer. This was an operation. According to arrest warrants, Barber and Baker were running what amounted to a counterfeit identity factory out of their home. Let me walk you through what police say they actually pulled out of that house, because the detail is staggering. They found the driver's licenses of 4 other people, real identities that weren't theirs. They found holographic files of the official state seals of 6 different states: Nevada, Michigan, Georgia, New York, Virginia, Texas. 6 states worth of government seals ready to be forged. And they didn't just have the designs. They had a specialized printer and ink capable of reproducing those seals and even printing onto metal, the kind of equipment that turns a fake into something that can fool a trained eye. Investigators say the couple had already used that equipment to manufacture a fraudulent state identification card for at least one person, and they'd even produced a fake registration tag for Baker's own vehicle, along with a specialized paper to make more. Therefore, this was not a careless hustle. This was a deliberate, technical, multi-state forgery operation hidden behind the front door of a tidy home in a community where no one suspected a thing. But the search turned up more than printers and seals. In the couple's own bedroom, police reported finding marijuana spread across several trays and something that lingers in the mind: dollar bills dusted with a white powdery residue. Investigators didn't say what that residue was, so neither will we. But the picture forming inside that house was growing darker by the item. Both Barber and Baker were arrested at the home on the 26th of May. When they went before a magistrate judge, bond was denied, the judge citing the sheer seriousness of what they were facing. At that moment, the charges were all about fraud and forgery, a long and serious list of them. No one watching had any idea that this couple, this house, and this operation were about to be tied to the unidentified man still waiting in a morgue for his name. But they were, and the connection, when it surfaced, would turn a fraud case into something far more sinister. So how did a fraud investigation become a murder case? The answer came through that 4-day search. When deputies raided the Langdale Chase home, they didn't simply grab the printers and the seals and leave. They stayed. For 4 days, investigators combed through that house, and neighbors watched it happen, growing more and more uneasy, telling reporters they felt on edge and concerned for their own safety. Imagine living on that street, watching law enforcement come and go from a neighbor's home for the better part of a week, knowing only that something was very wrong. And then there were the items deputies carried out of that home: a reciprocating saw, cleaning supplies, air fresheners. I'm going to set those 3 things down in front of you exactly as investigators removed them, and I'm not going to dress them up because the sources are careful and so are we. But you don't need anyone to connect those dots out loud to feel the weight of that particular combination, leaving a house where a man is now believed to have died. Because that's what investigators came to believe. Deputies now believe that Jamal Parker was killed inside that home. Here is where I have to be precise with you, because the truth deserves precision more than it deserves shock. The most disturbing claim in this entire case does not come from a police press release. It comes from Jamal's own family. They have said that they were told Baker and Barber cut Jamal's body up and placed part of it in the Dog River Reservoir. That account comes from the family, describing what they were told, and I want you to hold it exactly as what it is. But the reason it carries such unbearable weight is what Jamal's father said next. Charles Parker explained that the family can't even hold a regular funeral for his son because of the condition of his body. Think about that. A father, already robbed of his child, now robbed of the simple, human act of laying him to rest the way he should have been able to. Therefore, by the middle of June, the 2 cases had fully become one. On the 15th, the same day the Georgia Bureau of Investigation finally put Jamal's name to the body, Mario Andre Barber and Brittany Amber Baker were charged with his murder. The couple, already sitting in jail on an elaborate forgery case, were now accused of killing the man pulled from the reservoir. The fraud and the homicide, 2 stories that began completely apart, had collapsed into a single, chilling timeline. So where does the case stand now? Mario Andre Barber and Brittany Amber Baker have each been charged with murder in the death of Jamal Parker. They appeared before a judge, and both of them entered pleas of not guilty. Both are being held without bond. and Baker has hired a private attorney. I want to be clear and fair about this, because it matters. As of right now, these are charges, not convictions. The couple has pleaded not guilty, and the law says their guilt is something that has to be proven in a courtroom, not on a screen. We report what investigators allege and what the records confirm. The rest is for a jury. But that brings us all the way back to the question I planted at the very beginning, the one sitting at the center of this entire story. What connected Jamal Parker to these two people? How does a beloved Atlanta bartender, a man known for making strangers feel at home, end up dead inside the house of a couple running a multi-state forgery operation more than 20 miles from the city where he poured drinks? What was the thread? A debt? A favor? A document? A chance encounter that went catastrophically wrong? Did Jamal know them well, or did he barely know them at all? And here is the hard, honest truth. We don't know. Neither, as far as the public has been told, does anyone else outside that investigation. Officials have not released how Jamal Parker was killed. They have not released what evidence led them to charge this couple. And most hauntingly of all, they have not said one word about what connected the victim to the people now accused of ending his life. Investigators have stated plainly that they've shared no information about Baker and Barber's alleged connection to Parker, or about any possible motive. The case remains active, and it isn't even clear yet whether more arrests or more charges are still to come. So the question we started with doesn't get a satisfying answer tonight, and I won't you by inventing one. The most chilling thing about this case isn't the saw, or the reservoir, or the forged seals of 6 different states. It's the silence at the very center of it. A man is dead. 2 people are charged. And the reason why, the human thread that ties them together, is still locked behind a door none of us can open. Because in the middle of all that silence, there is one thing that rings out clearly, and it comes from the people who loved Jamal most. His family has refused to let him become nothing more than a case number. When Barber and Baker stood before the judge, Jamal's father and his 2 uncles were right there in that courtroom, facing the 2 people accused of killing him. One of his uncles described what that felt like in just 2 words: heart-wrenching, frustrating. That's a family doing the single hardest thing a family can be asked to do, showing up to look the accused in the face again and again, for someone who can no longer show up for himself. And when they stepped outside that courthouse, they didn't leave quietly. Jamal's father and his uncles stood together and chanted 2 words over and over: justice for Jamal. His father, Charles Parker, made it plain that in his eyes, even a life sentence wouldn't be enough for what was done to his son. This is a man carrying a grief most of us will never have to imagine, and still finding the strength to stand in public and say his son's name out loud, so the rest of us can't look away from it. I keep coming back to who Jamal was before any of this swallowed him. A bartender. A familiar face in bars across Atlanta. A man who, by his own father's account, was loved by everyone. Someone whose entire working life was spent on the giving end of other people's good nights. The welcome, the warmth, the sense that you'd arrived somewhere safe. We opened this story on the idea of a person like that, and now you know his name. Jamal Parker deserved to grow old telling the same stories behind the same bar. Instead, he became a man identified only by his tattoos, pulled from a quiet reservoir, his reason for dying still a mystery. And maybe that's the thing to carry with you when this video ends. Evil doesn't always look like evil. Sometimes it lives behind an ordinary front door, on a quiet, well-kept street, in a home where the neighbors never suspected a thing, until the day the deputies came and didn't leave. We trust the calm surface of the places we live. But every so often, a case like this one reminds us how little we really know about what goes on behind the doors we pass every single day. If Jamal's story stayed with you, take a second to leave a comment below, because his family does read these, and your words mean more than you know. Share this video so that Jamal Parker is remembered for the life he lived, and not only for the way it ended. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to Crime Cypher and turn on notifications, because this case is far from over, and the moment the answers come, the moment we learn what truly connected these 3 people, we will be right here to tell you. Until then, stay aware of the doors around you, keep asking the questions no one else will, and never let them bury the truth in silence.